Okay, good morning again, everyone. We're ready to start. We're going to be beginning what is the second day of this fifth National Cybersecurity Conference. We had a very productive and engaging day yesterday, and I believe for the part of the day that we'll be here, we will also have a very engaging two sessions. I have been reflecting yesterday on the fact that one of our stalwarts in the media sector, in the person of Mr. Lester Spalding, passed away very recently. And I think it would be appropriate if I ask that we stand for a brief moment of silence and respect in his honor. Thank you. So this morning's session is on cyber threats to governance, protecting democracy, and the electoral process. Our panel and presenters are here, and I'm going to call on the chair of the session, Professor Claremont Curtin of the University of the West Indies, to come introduce the panel and get things going. Professor Curtin.
Good morning, and I suppose I should use the traditional all protocols having been observed. I didn't hear the chair identify anyone, but I understand there are representatives from the Canadian High Commission. Any other? We're all of some substance, so that, let me say, protocols having been observed for everyone who recognizes their importance. My name is Claremont Curtin from the Department of Economics, and I was telling a colleague, Dr. Clark, I don't know why I was selected in this team, because I will bring economics to cybersecurity. And let me say that I teach a course called the Masters in National Security and Strategic Studies in the Management Studies, and we have a course called Defense Economics, which I've been teaching for, I nearly said N years, where N tends to infinity, but since the program started. Today, I have an easy task as chair to chair this session, which focuses on cyber threats to governance, protecting democracy, and the electoral process. And I suppose that given what is being experienced, discussed, and debated in the US, this is an issue which I suppose we are all concerned about. And hopefully I wish to, as chair and as a participant, learn more about cyber threats. What are some of the success factors? What are some of the failures? And how this knowledge can be used to protect our democracy, and more specifically, our electoral process. I was telling one of the panelists, Mr. Orrette Fisher, that as a Guyanese who has been living in Jamaica now for 5 decades, and therefore I'm a Jamaican if you are not born after, if you are born after December 30th, 1967, I apologize to you, but I've been here before you. But in our country, as I was growing up, there was a particular regime which was skilled, not necessarily in the use of, at that time, cyber security facilities, but creative electioneering to win elections for 28 years. Enough said. Those of you who know the history of Guyana political process would have heard and would probably know about this. Some recognize it, some do not. Now, I wish to introduce our very distinguished panel, and I will introduce everyone so we can flow smoothly. The lead presenter is Mr. Trevor Forrest, who is a senior advisor in the Ministry of Science, Energy, and Technology, and CEO and founder of 876 Solutions. He has worked for over 2 decades in the ICC industry, working in areas such as advanced network systems design, network security, web design and development, and he has been involved in consulting on e-commerce, internet security, and internet strategies for clients in the US and across the wider Caribbean. He attended Jamaica College and thereafter Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where he did a Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering, minoring in mathematics. Historically, his service in the local ICT industry clearly demonstrates that he has a strong commitment to driving improved standards of ICT adoption across both the private and the public sector, and he has consulted in the design and evaluation of ICT proposals and strategies. He is well known for evangelizing the adoption and use of open source technology across the public and private sector, and I think UWI has in fact taken up this evangelizing role too. Some of our colleagues in Mona School of Business are involved in this particular activity. So we expect from Mr. Forrest in his presentation some very important and useful information on the area of cyber threats to government. The second presenter is Mr. Julian Robinson, MP for the constituency of St. Andrews South since 2012. Sorry, Southeast. I'm sorry, there's a fundamental difference between... and one might be defined as a particular category and the other is not, yeah? All right. Opposition spokesman on science and technology, and currently the General Secretary of the opposition's PNP. From 2012 to 2016, he was the Minister of State in the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Energy and Mining. Very importantly, during this period of his tenure, he led the development of a national cybersecurity strategy, as well as the establishment of a cyber incident response team. Before entering representational politics, he began his career as a management and e-business consultant in London, where he worked for IBM, a multinational technology and consulting corporation, and Cyient Corporation, one of the first e-business systems innovators with headquarters in the US. He earned his BSc in Management and Economics. I prefer to say in Economics and Management from the University of the West Indies, and has an MBA from the University of Illinois. And I might add, he used to play cricket. Our final presenter is Mr. Orrette Fisher, the Director of Elections, who has served the Electoral Commission for over 2 decades, 9 of which have been spent as Director of Elections. In this role, he is responsible for the overall management and security of the Electoral Office of Jamaica. He focuses also on Jamaica's electoral database and the authorization of external access to such database. Critically, he has been instrumental in the technological development of the electoral process, which includes advancements in the voter registration process and the digitization of elector information. Notably, he has presided over the continued development and expanded use of the Electronic Voter Identification System, EVIS, used in select constituencies to identify electors by their fingerprints. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Management Studies, unfortunately not with economics, which he received with honors, and a master's degree in Public Sector Management, both from the University of the West Indies. In addition, he has certification in a wide range of professional courses. Colleagues, I'm sure you would appreciate that we have a valuable pool of knowledge in our panel, and we hope to both learn and engage via dialogue with them. I think the panelists will have been briefed as to the time schedule, and I will seek to monitor very closely your presentation in terms of time. This is not to suggest, of course, that in the post-presentation period you may have an opportunity to develop some of the points which you raised. My own experience as a panelist, and you need not follow this, has been that because time runs so quickly, I tend to start with my conclusion and then build on the conclusion. Because what happens over time is that you see the chairman said 2 minutes left and you haven't reached your conclusion. But you need not follow my advice, okay? So let us introduce Mr. Trevor Forrest.
Morning, everybody. I don't think I have the luxury of starting with the conclusion first. But let me say this. Sorry. What a difference 2 years makes, because 2 years ago and subsequent presentations, I went from doing interesting and scary life hacks. Sorry? Oh, yeah. I don't talk very loud. So, but yeah, what a difference 2 years makes. Because 2 years ago, in fact 3 years. This is I first introduced the concept of ransomware here, and after that, we're doing scary life hacks and discussions about DNSSEC. And now, thanks to Hopeton, it's as if I've moved from Converse to Clarks and shorts to Dockers, because now I'm talking about governance and policy and all of these things. So it's really a I really have to question the decision, because when you look at the company that I'm in, it's almost scary even to me. So what I'm going to do is, I have to change the hat, put on a new suit, and start talking about how cybersecurity and how cyber threats affect things that are very important to us, namely this concept of democracy, and something that most of us participate in, which is the electoral process. And I thought that I might start off by, let's see if this works, by putting up some definitions of what democracy is and what the electoral process is. Now, I know I have the, experts as it relates to these here, the luminaries actually. But thanks to, the Webster Dictionary and good old Wikipedia, I was able to coin a couple of definitions for what democracy is. And here you see it's government by the people. It's a system of government by the whole population or those eligible to vote. It's a form of government where power is vested in the people. and exercised directly by them or their agents. Now I want you to pay close attention to that last one because it's going to unfold as my presentation goes through. Then we have the electoral process, which people, I think the definition, they're more familiar with that. Method where you vote for somebody who is a candidate for a particular post, or someone is elected to a public office, or you take votes and count them. All right? So these definitions are really there to contextualize what it is we're going to say, because some of us may ask how cybersecurity drop into any of this. And needless to say, the recent occurrences in the US election, which is very popular, and there are other occurrences, Kenya, France, that may not be in the news as much, kind of highlight the importance and the need to pay attention to what cybersecurity has to do with and how it affects the electoral process and, by extension, the concept of democracy. So, and I'm going to, because I can't really stand behind this podium, so I'm gonna move around. I have a mic, so let me turn that on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good, fabulous. All right, so the core of every democracy is free and fair elections. It's very important. But as we move into this digital society and start to do things in more advanced, technologically advanced ways, certain things change. But one thing remains true. After you strip away all of the showmanship, the rhetoric, the campaigning and all of that, one thing as far as a citizen participating in this process is concerned remains true. There has to be trust. Because if you don't have trust in the system, you're always going to question it. Now, this is very important because what cyber threats and attacks in democracies and as it relates to the electoral process are meant to do is to erode trust. So the purveyors of these tools that are meant to do this is what they want to do, right? They want to erode trust. They want to influence your views, influence your thoughts, your opinions, and so on, because all of these things ultimately affect which box you check, right? Now, in one sense you could say, some of the cyber threats and the actors are like politicians because they're trying to influence you in a particular direction. But the thing about these guys is that you don't see them and you don't see what they do, but what they do influence your actions. And how does that happen? Well, when you look at the rise in social media, informal channels of news, fake news, the increased use of email, phishing, scam mails, and so on. In fact, when you look at social engineering efforts, which are neatly camouflaged as, legitimate forms of engagement, these are all the things that affect your views, your opinions, and hence your actions. These are all things that can be orchestrated through cyber attacks, okay? And again, it is all meant to do one thing: erode the trust so that you start questioning the process and the whole concept of democracy. So some of the cases that we know about: North America, the United States, very popular one there. It's in the news a lot. Europe, there are cases where attacks have occurred in Europe, France being one. And there are a lot of European countries that themselves are concerned about the effect that cyber attacks have on their electoral process and hence their democracy. And what it really boils down to is when we ask how many and which types of countries can be affected by these things, it's any country that is connected to the internet, which is just about everybody. Okay? So what that leads to now is a situation where, you know, when you watch TV and you learn about, you know, state-sponsored attacks and the destabilization attempts of one nation against another, what that starts to bring into sharp focus is the fact that we no longer have wars that are fought with bombs and bullets and guns. Because now you can fight wars in cyberspace that have more devastating effects the more connected we are. Okay? So when you talk about affecting the outcome of an election by not invading a country or any means of that nature, by doing and effecting an election from miles away, not even having to exist or live in that country, then we start to see the scale and the concern that we must have. So some of the threats to the electoral process. As we move to a more digital society, a more connected world, naturally, our systems and processes move in that direction. So what you find happening is that you have increased use of technology in the electoral process. Electronic ballot scanners, electronic voting machines, online voting systems. And it's not only for national elections, but even elections within organizations. Because you have to question those too, because those processes should also be democratic. Online voter registration systems. Yeah, these are all connected devices. And then when you have all these systems connected, then you have to start saying, okay, what happens if I can't access those systems to carry out the tasks that I want, or it's my right to do? So then you start to have to consider the roles of denial of service attacks during times that you're supposed to take part in these efforts. You have to start thinking about ransomware because, okay, so you've voted or you've provided information, you've registered, but suddenly a nation state can't access that info because some dude in, you know, Asia is holding that info hostage. And then we say, well, look, all you have to do is isolate these systems and problem solved. But by no means should you be of the view or be fooled that an isolated system, which is one that is not connected to the internet, is not vulnerable to these kinds of threats, right? Let me just give you one example. Everybody got a jump drive in your folders yesterday? Yeah. One enterprising person could simply walk in with a malware-infested jump drive under the guise that they're maintaining a server that holds all this valuable information, and there you have it. Obviously, you want to have systems in place to deal with that kind of stuff, but the general idea is that stuff happens. So it not being connected to the internet doesn't mean it's safe. But you must be aware of these things and make sure the processes are in place to heighten the level of safety that you need. So, current cases of cyber attacks in the electoral process. Well, everybody knows the poster children, United States, France, and Kenya. If you're not aware of what happened in Kenya, the court had to nullify an election result. And the reason they did that was it was questioned that the electoral system was hacked. And it was a fairly convincing case. And the court decided to, all right, let's do it over. Think about that for a second in Jamaica. There are some concerned countries: Germany, France, UK, Estonia, Switzerland, Indonesia. Many of these countries are highly sophisticated jurisdictions that were well along the road to using the technology. And they're kind of on the leading edge. One of the risks there is that as you evolve, those who mean you harm evolve too. And they can now use you as a guinea pig for everything else. So in a sense, Jamaica is kind of lucky because we're not on the bleeding edge, which means we can learn from the mistakes of a lot of these countries. So while I'm going through this, I don't want you to feel that, oh, geez, you know what? Forget anything electronic. Let's go back to paper ballots and, let's go back to the 60s and 70s. No. What we need to really look at is what we need to do. What were some of the mistakes? How did they fix them? What are some of the areas we want to go into? And what are some of the areas we need to be guarded against as it relates to infusion of technology into our electoral process? And again, what are some of the forms that these attacks can take? Advertising. This was a huge one in the United States elections. People didn't know that, though, because we consume differently. Ads come, we read them, great. It leaves something in your mind as you're bombarded by. I remember when I used to go to college. I'm sitting at home watching TV, and between the breaks, you'd have probably 5 ads, and 4 of them were where you can go and get food. And I can guarantee you, one of them got me. When you look at the number of ads that you get when you're browsing, one of them going to get you. One of them going to leave a mark here. So advertising is a method. Phishing and social engineering, it's a method, right? You get the strange emails, you get some appealing ones too. But how do you know that the email that you are getting from any one of the political parties or their surrogates is legit? How do you know that the message is legit? Man-in-the-middle attacks, denial of service attacks. Again, how do you ensure that when you go online and do anything that has to do with exercising your right and responsibility, how do you know that it's actually going to where it should go? Right? That's what all of these things are. Identity theft. What's the unique identifier that says you are you to these systems? Right? How do you ensure that another person doesn't take your identity? How do you guard against that? And, again, we've come from the times when we know about bogus voting and ballot box stuffing and all of that. And one of the solutions is to implement the technology. We have to affect these things in a particular way. Can't be careless with it. And then, of course, you have attacks on the political parties themselves. You saw the alleged attacks against the DNC. But who is to say the systems of any one of our political parties can't be affected as well? They too have a responsibility to protect their vast treasure troves of information and tactics and maneuvers and processes, right? So they're not immune either. Because if any of the parties are affected so much that it inhibits their ability to carry out their duty, then democracy is affected. Hacktivism. You have people out there who say, look, none of them people that work for me, so I'm going to start doing things that negates the effect of both of them. Right? These things are possible, especially, and this was discussed yesterday, when you have the ability to engage crime as a service. If you go on the dark web and you have enough resources, you can employ people to do some very interesting things to connected systems. Okay? So these are considerations that have to be made. And of course, and I saved that one for last, state-sponsored attacks. Other countries who have a vested interest in a particular outcome. And they have resources to do this. So we have to be mindful of these things, and then in our decision making and our moves to, move in a particular direction, the government is high on a digital knowledge-based society. What's the baggage that comes along with that, right? So, how do we defend against this stuff? Because now you've been sufficiently scared or frightened into some of the possibilities that exist. How do we attempt to defend ourselves against these kinds of realities? Well, as is the case even in business, you have to take a risk-based approach, right? Because in all of these situations, we have three things that prevail: processes, people, and then the technology. Because most times I feel like, yeah, you can just throw the technology at it and it'll sort it out. No. People and processes impact the outcome, right? Chairman spoke about the fact that Jamaica is one of the few Caribbean islands that has a fairly robust national cybersecurity strategy. We have to review that periodically to ensure that as things evolve out there, our strategies evolve to deal with some of the problems that come up. Something that is often not discussed, and I'm always interested in hearing the views of the director on this, and it's to contemplate making electoral systems essential services and designate them that way. Because when you designate something an essential service, it gets a very special treatment, right? So a discussion needs to be had to look at designating our electoral systems an essential service and what needs to be changed in law to facilitate that. New policies need to be created. We need to actually have and implement response programs that will put us in a place that, if something does happen, we have a defined response process for it. It's a problem with many businesses. They know they're going to get attacked. They put in strategy, but they don't really have a response plan. So when it happens, step one, we do this. Step two, we do this. Step three, we do this. We need to do that as a government and country to ensure that we are able to withstand anything that comes. And of course, public awareness, review of various legislations, and I think the one that is of most importance, which is really what creates the concern in people's mind, is how we treat with the custodians of this data, people who are always interfacing with it, right? Because we need to trust them. And we have a trust deficit as it relates to systems and the people who are in charge of them. So we have to ensure that the relevant training is there and the relevant measures and processes are there to ensure that you feel safe about them being in charge of your info. Shameless plug, these are the kinds of things data protection legislation seeks to address. So, what's the end goal here? End goal is really 3, maybe 4 things. Security, of the processes, security of democracy, ensuring and maintaining integrity, and more importantly, trust. Because in doing that, we will be able to protect democracy and protect your right to vote and participate in that process. That's my 2 cents. I'm going on and I'm going to take no more questions on data protection. Right? Mashed me up yesterday, but that's okay. Thank you very much.
Very disciplined, 20 minutes. I am particularly pleased, so I asked Julian to follow in the leadership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Trevor from the Ministry, Mr. Fisher from the ECJ. Let me thank Hopetoun for inviting me, and good morning to you all. I thought the questions to Trevor wouldn't have been about data protection, but about needs. I thought more people were interested in needs than data protection. Anyway, I'm going to explore a couple of themes with you. I don't have a presentation, but there have been some developments that have taken place in the last, as Trevor said, in the last 2 years that I think pose a real threat to democracy. And I'm going to read from an article, and I'm reading directly from it. A wave of computational propaganda, largely driven by Russia, is impacting politics around the world by spreading misinformation designed to manipulate public opinion, researchers said. The Oxford University team presented research in Washington on the use of automatic programs, or bots, on social media, aimed at influencing politics in 9 countries, including the United States. Computational propaganda is one of the most powerful new tools against democracy, said the research paper directed by Oxford's Philip Howard and Samuel Woolley. The research is not the first to note the existence of Twitter bots and other automated tools aimed at disrupting politics, but offer insight into the global scale of effort, which are traced mainly to Russia, but also operate in China and in the target countries themselves. We know, and this is again quotes, we know that there's a building with hundreds of employees in St. Petersburg with a budget of millions of dollars dedicated to manipulating public opinion in a number of countries, Howard said at the presentation. Howard said the Russian style of propaganda involves seeding multiple conflicting and contradictory stories. Woolley said the goal of this effort is to confuse. It's not necessarily to sell a fake story. It is to make people so apathetic about politics and policy in general that they do not really want to engage anymore. The research team analyzed tens of millions of posts on 7 different social media platforms during elections, political crises, and national security incidents between 2015 and 2017 in Brazil, China, Canada, Germany, Poland, Taiwan, Russia, the Ukraine, and the United States. While propaganda and fake news are long-standing tools in politics, the use of automation and algorithms to create bots on social media appears to have accelerated the spread of misinformation. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter have taken steps to curb the spread of fake news stories while also urging it is not their role, while also arguing that it is not their role to edit or control content. Researchers have said that Twitter is more vulnerable to bots because it allows users to create anonymous accounts and its programming platform is open. In the United States, researchers said that they concluded that bots had measurable influence during the 2016 election by affecting the flow of information. Armies of bots built to follow, retweet, or like a candidate's content make that candidate seem more legitimate, more widely supported than they actually are. The illusion of online support for a candidate can spur actual support through a bandwagon effect. In Russia, the researchers found that 45% of political conversation is dominated by highly automated accounts. While Twitter was an effective tool for pro-democracy activists during the Arab Spring movements starting in 2010, the researchers say authoritarian governments now use these platforms to suppress social activism. Perhaps the most flagrant examples of computational propaganda are in Ukraine, they said, describing it as the front line of numerous disinformation campaigns in Europe. And it goes on. I've started here because I believe we have to start a conversation about some of these things in Jamaica. There are some legitimate cybersecurity concerns about how we protect our data, the data that currently resides with the Electoral Office or electronic identification system, etc. And I know Mr. Fisher will speak to those. But we really haven't engaged in a discussion about these matters here in Jamaica. And quite frankly, I believe that we have to start the conversation because when you think of the impact as done by real research, and they analyze, I think, over 20 million tweets and posts, etc. So it's actually hard research. The fact is that, as Trevor mentioned, you do have players outside of an electoral system who can impact it in a profound way. Now, I'm not going to conclude that that's why Trump won in the US and why Brexit happened in the United Kingdom, etc. But without a doubt, they played a role. And the question is, how do we safeguard our democracy? By doing all the things about protecting our systems and ensuring one man, one vote, but how do we safeguard our democracies against this type of manipulation and influence? And the reality is that I don't think we have even started to discuss these issues or even think about them. The European Union had a conference 2 weeks ago on fake news, an entire conference. And they have actually put together a working group to determine how do you deal with issues like fake news. Now, in our jurisdiction, who would have responsibility for monitoring those types of activities? If someone puts out information on a particular leader or a candidate, that can have a very negative influence on how he or she is perceived and how people vote. Now, who has the responsibility to monitor that? Is that the function of an electoral commission? Is it the function of a media association or a press association? And who determines, for example, in the first instance, whether this is fake news or not? You know, frankly, if it suits my side, then it's fine, right? But if it doesn't, then I'm going to call it fake. And to what extent can we guard ourselves against the bots which exist and which, as a country, we won't be immune from? And so I think as a country, we have made significant advances in our electoral system. And Trevor, I'll tell you, and I know Mr. Fisher won't want to pat himself on the back, but we have one of the best systems in the world, by far. One of the best systems in terms of ensuring. No, we don't like to praise our own. I don't have nothing to do with it, but we have one of the best systems in the world, and the EOJ is widely called upon to consult in other countries, where I think we are at the stage where it's one man, one vote, and the same person voting. Right? Now, there are other factors that I think impact our democracy, which I'm not going to go into in this presentation, like the extent of money and other factors. But in terms of the system itself, it works. You know, when Claremont was talking about South, the difference between South and Southeast St. Andrew. In South, 95% of the people vote for the People's National Party. In Southeast, where I'm the member of Parliament, I'm trying to get it to about 60, right? But there are big differences between South and Southeast. But the electronic voting system is used in my constituency, and it does ensure that if you wanted to try and manipulate the system, you can't, because you have to come there with your fingerprint. It issues the ballot. They have a backup system. They have something called a big black book. Most people don't know this, that has your picture in it. So even if you're trying to bogus it, it's kind of hard to bogus it now. But there are other ways to influence it. So, Hopeton, I would say we need to start this conversation in Jamaica. It's not just reserved for political leaders. I know the media association, the PAJ, had a discussion about who regulates the media. But this will come to Jamaica if it hasn't already existed. I mean, those of us who are active in politics, we have to deal with the trolls every day. Every day you post something, you have a set of people who, you know, just come and lick you because you post something. But the reality is that it has become a lot more sophisticated than that. And when you think of the increase in numbers of the persons who participate in the political process, and the fact that most of them get their news from online. Let me just do a poll in here. How many people still buy the Gleaner and the Observer? The hard copy? Okay. Only on Sunday. Only on Sunday. But the majority of us read the newspaper online. The majority of us get our international news online from social media. So social media does have a significant impact on the way it influences public opinion. And the extent to which you have actors who are interested in manipulating that, then our democracy is at threat. I mean, I'm not going to go into whether the outcome of the US election is a threat to democracy, right? I won't say that because we've been advised not to speak on that topic. But you can see how factors like the impact of the hacking of the DNC's database, the stories about the Hillary Clinton, it may have impacted how people voted, and in other jurisdictions as well. So it's not a phenomenon that is far off. It's not something that we in this region are necessarily immune from. But the reality is we are, in a sense, in uncharted waters, and there are no clear-cut answers to these issues of regulation because the platforms themselves don't believe that their responsibility is to regulate. I know Facebook now has, for example, they have hired a whole set of people to do analysis on whether people are suicidal. As an example, there are countries that are forcing them through legislation to deal with issues of terrorism and those types of threats. But the extent to which they care about whether a small island country of 3 million people, whether our election outcomes are influenced by that, they probably don't. And it's real in Jamaica. The last election, February 26, one constituency separated the two parties. And if you count the number of votes, you had one constituency, well, the one we just lost, that was separated by 5 votes. So if you think that influencing 100 people, 200 people in a marginal seat, it can make a difference in terms of who becomes the government and the kind of policies and programs that a country will implement. So I don't have the answers, but I know it is something that as a country we have to face and something that we will have to deal with, and it will become more and more pronounced in the years to come, simply because you have a new generation that is more engaged using social media as the principal source of information on everything that they do. And the decisions that they make, political and otherwise, are guided by that. So I haven't come to you with any answers. I've just put some things out there for food for thought. And I hope that Hopeton, in maybe wearing some other hats, that we can begin a discussion on some of these issues in the country to see how we even set up some kind of framework to deal with the regulation of some of these issues. And it's a balance because, you know, we obviously advocate for freedom of expression and we don't want to jeopardize that as a country. But there are real threats to our democracy if we allow just an unregulated online space to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fisher. And please hold your questions, because immediately after his presentation, we will go into the discussion period.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, fellow panelists, Professor Dunn, ladies and gentlemen all, a very good morning to you. Well, I am seeking to take the advice of the moderator by starting with my conclusion, because when I was told that I had 5 minutes to present, I don't think there's time to do anything other than to conclude. Now, it is very interesting that the whole issue of the democratic process as opposed to the electoral process, because I want to separate the two. Because the political process is open to all the influences that the other speakers addressed. The electoral process, however, is the actual carrying out of the result of that influence. So based on the influence that the social media, for example, or some foreign jurisdiction would have had on you, it is my job to ensure that you faithfully carry out what you were influenced to do. That is my job. And therefore, you want to be sure that what you wanted to do is what the results show. So my focus is more on ensuring that the electoral process is free and fair, and as we love to say, free from fear. Now, before I actually go through my brief presentation, or I should say conclusion, I'd just like to advise that the Electoral Office, for example, in Jamaica, we were actually the first country that used fingerprint as a part of the electoral process. Now, almost every country worldwide uses some form of biometrics to ensure that there is some semblance of order in terms of the voters list, as in each person being represented once. Now, public sector entities like the Electoral Office of Jamaica, which collects and stores personal, confidential data on citizens, have an awesome responsibility to secure and protect the data from unauthorized access and use. Access to elector data is governed by statute. There are laws which govern the use of the information, the breach of which carries several financial and/or custodial penalties. Therefore, the Electoral Office has implemented policies and systems to manage unauthorized access to this data from both internal and external users. Internally, it is important that only authorized users who are employees have access to the data, and that they access only as much data as is required to carry out their particular job function. This means different levels of access is granted to different users, and an audit trail is generated to identify who accessed the data and exactly what was done. Externally, the EOJ authorizes minimal access to specific categories of data guided by provisions in electoral law. These include information available on our website, so where you can vote, what PD you are in, and so on. And we also provide data to business entities through authorized direct access in terms of verification of voter ID cards. Use of data by authorized users has to be specific to their roles. It is important that authorized users are not able to access more information than needed, download, copy, or reproduce information accessed by them, or to share the information with third parties, whether for personal gain or for some other reason, if they are not authorized to do so. Unauthorized access naturally allows for unauthorized or inappropriate use of information. The implication for individuals in an age where identity theft, for example, is amongst the leading crimes being committed can be life-changing.
the implications are even more significant in relation to governance, because unauthorized access to the data could result in the data being lost, resulting in the organization being unable to carry out its function at the time when it needs to. Having to do it all over again could result in very, very huge costs to taxpayers. It could also result in the data being changed or manipulated in such a way, for example, allowing ineligible persons to vote or to prevent eligible persons from being able to vote. While much can be said, for example, for off-site storage and backup, the timing of an attack could have very grave implications for the process of governance. So, for example, if at the time when an election is to be held, we are unable to perform that role due to some intrusion, then the impact on governance would be significant. The EOJ security policy are guided by what is known as the CIA triad, which is, as you all know, is to preserve the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of information or data. Confidentiality refers to protecting the information from disclosure to unauthorized parties. Integrity is protecting information from being modified by unauthorized parties. And availability is ensuring that authorized parties are able to access the information when needed. This requires the prevention of downtime due to denial of service attacks and having a backup strategy to prevent data loss. Our Information Systems Department continuously monitors advancements in cybersecurity and data protection technology. We also use a number of ways to prevent unauthorized access to database by both internal and external individuals. These include policies and procedures included password and IT acceptable use policies, user access and role management, firewall and intrusion prevention and detention system, a segmented network, which is a best practice, data encryption, network monitoring, software implemented to monitor the network and send alerts on unusual activity, cybersecurity training for the technical staff, and user awareness intervention for all users. In terms of the whole issue of voting, at present there is very little threat, since that is not really, it is more manual and not really networked. So there's limited threat in that regard. And from my personal experience, I'm not sure. What we actually do know is electronic voter identification, not the actual voting itself. And from my interaction with the political directorate and a lot of electors, there don't seem to be a lot of trust factor. And therefore, a lot of people would not seem inclined to move towards electronic voting. But I am sure that over time, this will become a part of the conversation, especially when the younger generation come to the fore, those who would have been born and grown up with the use of technology. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Colleagues, we have had 3 very interesting, informative, stimulating presentations, and now I open the floor to questions, comments. Procedurally, I don't know. Typically, we'll ask you to identify yourself. I see a mic there. I don't know if people are going to line up or there's a facility for someone to walk the mic around. People must come and line up. Okay, please. Morning.
Everybody hearing, right? Yes. Okay. Well, I was born in the internet age, and I just want to ask a question, right? How can we start a discussion about an internet-based electoral system when some of Jamaica doesn't have the basics, such as light or internet, or persons are even educated about it? Another question. This goes to Mr. Fisher. The best electoral system in the Caribbean that we have, right? Is it distributed in Jamaica or just in Kingston? Now I want to know if the system that we have, this fingerprint system, is it widely distributed across Jamaica, or we have to go to Kingston, come to Kingston to have it, to use this system?
Okay, in relation to
well, it's a question, so
right. to your first question or your first observation,
right.
The conversation needs to start now. We agree that not everyone would necessarily have access to the internet, but more and more people do have access. And so it's not a case of waiting until everybody would have had access before starting that conversation, because it is something that would have to be phased in, as most systems are, where the people who have access would be able to, for example, register online once that is available, and those who don't would then go into the office and they would be also registered electronically, but with some assistance. So that is the conversation that needs to start from now, even before we get to that stage. The use of the electronic voter identification system is in fact not limited to Kingston. I think we have used it a little bit outside of Kingston, possibly in St. Catherine. However, at present, it is concentrated in specific constituencies for certain reasons, which I'm sure most people would be aware of. The plan, however, funding being available, is to expand it to most constituencies. But with movement in terms of technology, we have now identified and will be able to use single handheld devices that would make it a lot more easy to set up and to support. And so the plan is to move to having a lot more constituencies using the identification, using fingerprint to identify the voters, and thus significantly reduce any possibility of impersonation.
Okay. Just another food for thought. I think we should fix the black and white stuff first before we move into the colored.
Next question, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Helen Ann Elizabeth Wilkinson, and I must thank Professor Dunn and Caramack for putting on this seminar. Maybe I should just say quickly to MP Robinson, I don't know if you should worry too much about the new technologies, because we've always had fake news from, Christopher Columbus discovering Jamaica, etc. And
the problem with that is that's what I was taught in history when I was at high school.
But it's all wrong. And to say that we should not underestimate the power, not a pun on word, maybe it's as power, but the power of the people. Because people are saying their own things. Like right now, I traveled across Jamaica, and the taximan has taken it on himself to educate me about the mark of the beast. And I'm coming downtown, and people are walking into the store and say, mark of the beast, prepare, prepare, prepare. I'm going halfway through, I'm seeing mark of the beast. I go man a park, and a lady seriously sit down and telling me, no, this is what it's about. I don't know if it's because of Aishana, but the people are wearing bandana, and the people are sewing bandana and making things, So people have their own response. I didn't have to necessarily, I might have had different outcomes for the election, but I was in a store and they were selling handkerchiefs. And the man said, I want two, and he want two red, but he can only afford two. So I don't know, sometimes just the people on the street will give you, there's much technology, no matter what. Just as Bob Marley said, what he said, have no fear for atomic energy, for none of them can stop the time. Mrs. Trevor? Right, I think that point that you made about it being Electoral Commission being essential services is important. In fact, I raised that at the point when I had the opportunity to work as a presiding officer, because I believe that if we should have an earthquake or a major disaster, I think that the Electoral Commission, along with the political parties and their ground workers, would have the machinery to instantly do earthquake management and get to people and know where people are. I saw people from both sides of the party. They know where every old woman is and so on. So I think that energy that we have in the political system at the PD level, the PD managers, the runners, along with the electoral office, is something you should look at, and look at first aid training, CPR management, water distribution. So, you know, beyond Zozo, you know, I think the electoral office and the political parties together at that level could see what could be done to help our people, especially if we do have an earthquake. I mean, having worked, I mean, we stayed up all night, you stay up with your ballot box, you go to the thing, so it's very exciting. But, you know, as an intervention and to follow on that suggestion, I think we should have serious lobbying for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Okay, as we await the line to form, let me use the opportunity of the chairman to raise one issue. Go ahead. In the discussion, and the first presenter touched on it, the question of resources. And I would like to throw this question to the panel. We are looking at defense versus attacks, and I would like to hear the panel's view on what are the costs and benefits of a response or a series of responses with respect to defending our system's integrity against attacks. But I'll allow the next questioner to come forward, and then we can follow up.
It's actually on a similar line. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Amana McNoon. I'm a tutor at the University of the West Indies. On the subject of building trust and confidence in the systems, we have a public sector where most of the agencies now have ICT departments, but historically that's always been a sort of an afterthought. So they are small, they are in many cases restricted to systems administration. And in the new sort of world order that we have, where there's a need to build out those resources, the skill sets that are represented in the public sector, and the difficulties that we have having regard to the fact that there's restrictions on public sector spending and hiring freezes, public sector rationalization. I would just like your thoughts on where you see us in that respect.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right,
I think all three panelists can take a...
Right. That's a very good question and observation. And I can say right now that there is a ICT transformation process occurring within government that is meant to and designed to address those very concerns. Because one of the things that you find is that even though we have IT departments in all 200 plus MDAs, and we're infusing technology, we're not doing it in a very efficient way. And the people who have to interact with these agencies are not benefiting from the use of the technology in the best way. So what we're looking to do is to really change the governance framework that exists within the public sector right now to, one, make it more efficient, more cost effective in its use of technology, and thereby realizing the real benefits to the customer, which is the citizen, that we ought to really realize. As it relates to the question about defense, I'm glad you actually used that word, because a lot of times we speak about cybersecurity when we actually need to be talking about cyber defense, because we are now finding that not only as a country but as businesses and so on in a country, you're a target. So we really seriously have to look at the cyber defense component versus just simply security, because some would argue that security is what you do after something happened. Defense is trying to be proactive and prevent it before it happens, or deal with it as it is happening. So in that vein, there are discussions that have started months ago that speak to, and in fact, when I was here last year, I addressed that very concern where we, as a country, needed to start looking at a national cybersecurity and defense apparatus that looked at not only securing our electoral system, but securing all essential services, you JPS, you NWC, all your utilities and those kinds of things. And the discussions have seriously started as it relates to the cost of such a thing. So you have to do naturally a cost benefits analysis of this. That tends to be a little challenging and time consuming, but let me put some perspective on a small component of that. In 2016, reported losses due to cyber attacks reached $100 million. And that's losses. And I was going to give it the impact. And I said, that's not Jamaican dollars, that's US dollars. And that's only what was reported, because we know we don't report everything. And when you look at what that means, then it kind of gives you an idea of what we ought to look at when we're thinking about investing in these kinds of solutions and platforms to mitigate that kind of thing, because that is only loss as it relates to transactions and so on. We have a lot more that we have not touched on that cyber threats will affect, that we have not put a definite figure to. So it is something that the discussion has started. One of the main actors in that is, and you'd recall that a new post, which is a national security advisor, was created, and one of his mandates is to look seriously at these kinds of things and put us in a position to deal with those kinds of eventualities.
Thank you.
And he's from the Defense Force.
If I might just briefly state that I tend to agree that the ICT department in most government organizations were lagging, but I have seen a lot of changes, a lot of activity in recent years in terms of more concentration being placed on them. However, the Electoral Office as an organization has had a very, very developed and high-profile ICT department for some time, and we operate at two levels where part of our functions we consider specific to us, which cannot be shared, but then at the broader level, we are willing to participate in other aspects in terms of data sharing. We, for example, were amongst the pioneers in setting up or using GIS, GPS technology, where we would have mapped all the constituencies and polling stations and a number of other features. And we have had numerous requests from other agencies to share that information. And that's information that can easily be shared. But when it comes to aspects of the electoral process, which could be compromised, then we have to be very careful in that regard.
The only thing I would say about the public sector is that, we're severely constrained by the types of salaries we can offer people in ICT, and particularly persons who have experience on the cybersecurity side are in such great demand, both within the private sector and abroad, that the challenge you have is really getting people and retaining them. and also ensuring that you can have the appropriate level of skills within the public sector, given the compensation levels. So it remains a challenge. It will continue to be a challenge, but I think efforts have been made and continue to be made to try and address those issues.
Morning, everyone. Damian Diaglar, IT and risk management practitioner. All right, so I have a comment, not really a question, but just a comment to put some emphasis. I really enjoy the presentations, I may say that, and I like the way they flowed into each other. Trevor, on a particular slide, from a defense perspective, you mentioned process, people, and technology. I particularly liked how you placed emphasis on people. Case in point, Director Fisher mentioned that user awareness is a critical aspect of it. I wasn't aware that the electronic identification system, I thought it was an electronic voting system that's in place in Kingston. So I guess we need to sensitize and put more effort in the information sharing aspect of it when it comes to security and cyber defense. It's scary, it's a scary thought, of our electoral, our democracy being attacked, if we should move over to a electronic voting system. So really and truthfully, as is the case, MP with NIDS, persons, there's a lot of fake news flying around, so persons need to be aware of what it is that we're doing at all times, to sort of militate against fake news being disseminated. And we as Jamaicans, we just grab on to anything sometimes, So the information sharing is critically important, I think, when it comes to cybersecurity and the role that everybody needs to play.
Thank you. I think these are very important points, and I just want to, while I await the next person, to raise two other quick issues which have been touched on. First of all, the role of public education. And I think that I would like definitely to recommend, Hopton, if it's not being done, that this conference be shared publicly via UWITV and other media, especially across the region. We haven't heard much about what is going on in other Caribbean countries, and Jamaica obviously is playing a leading role in this area. But other Caribbean countries, I'm sure, can benefit from the discussions which have been undertaken over the last day and a half. And I would like to propose that as part of public education, not only here in Jamaica, but across the region, that this issue, these issues be aired. Without disrespect, I look at the audience, although vision sometimes constrains me, and I see the average age appears to be over 40, maybe over 50. And I'm wondering whether we could find a way. The first speaker was a youth born in this generation, this IT savvy generation, whether we could share this information, Hopton, with schools and with younger people. And I put this also in the context of the role of the university. And Julian just mentioned the question of the labor cost of people skilled in this area. What are we doing, and what can we do to mobilize students to do more technical degree programs to deal with cyber-oriented issues? I think this is very, very important. Each of us in here who are paying taxes legally, I pay my taxes immediately I receive the slave wage from the university. And many of you would know that this is a plantation. It remains a plantation. So our wages are slave wages. And each of us pays over $500,000 per annum to subsidize students. And we need, therefore, in the culture of the society, some labor market planning, educational planning, where we advise students, because many students come on campus, they don't know what they want to do. We need, and this is directed at the policymakers and the politicians on both sides of the house, right? Many of whom are UWI graduates. Let us pay attention to labor market planning so that from high school we can advise students these are some of the areas where a need exists. And therefore we won't have excess demand. We may have excess supply of people trained in these areas, but they can find jobs not only in Jamaica but across the region. That's my...
Well, my first comment, Professor, is that I think you need to change the glasses, because when I look in the audience, they're definitely under 50, yes. The majority.
Okay, that's right. In all sincerity, I apologize. And I'll ask Julian to advise me which optician to go to.
Chairman, you said you're an economist, and we know you are of repute, but you're also not too far from the political realm, because you seem to combine both of them very, very well.
In theory.
This conference, Chairman, brings together some of the youngest and brightest that we've ever seen assembled in the University of the West Indies, because of the topic that we deal with. Interestingly, it also brings together more younger men than we have normally assembled in the university, even as we are working on bringing more brilliant women to the conference, some of whom are already here. So there is something special and engaging about this conference, and perhaps that's part of why it continues to roll forward over the last 5 years. As regards the public information, this particular conference is being live streamed. We should have said that, but it's going much wider than the persons present. We are also very happy that the RJR Communications Group, which brings together a whole stable of media outlets, has now come on stream. And we hope that as a result of that, we will also get a much wider engagement with the public in relation to the outputs of this conference, besides what we already do via online media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hopton. And let me apologize most sincerely and recognizing my own visual constraints. And it could be because, with respect, I was only looking at, say, the first 5. I could only see up to the first.
Mr. Chair. Well, before your question, I just wanted to address an observation and concern. I feel compelled to do this. I actually chair an advisory board at UTech as it relates to the School of Computing and IT. And one of the things that, as someone from industry, that we find is that you're absolutely right. A lot of the students flowing in and out, they're not quite sure what they want to do, and there needs to be some help to kind of guide, and that has to start before they get to university. But the thing about it also is that I also observe that the universities themselves do not act quickly enough to introduce curricula and to make what they're teaching the students allow them to be competitive. So what we're saying here is that there's a role for academia, there's a role for the private sector, and there's a role for government. But at the same time, we have to, it cannot take 5 years to turn around and introduce a new item in your curriculum because industry is now saying this is where the hot job is, because in 5 years, that might not be the hot job. So by the time you introduce it to your student population, it's not cool anymore. What that requires is greater interaction with the industry and the private sector. to make sure that you're kind of keeping in lockstep with what industry needs are. Also, and this is as it relates to cyber, one of the things the government is considering really is in its build out of a national cybersecurity and defense architecture is the creation of a cyber security academy. Now, what Julian said is absolutely right. We can't pay them and we can't keep them. But if you can keep producing them, you won't have the problem of not having them. So what you find is, yes, you hire some. I mean, Warren was here yesterday talking about the fact that, you know, the CFCU is just continuously losing people. And you can't stop that because we can't pay them. But one of the things we also need to be able to do is to try to churn out more of them so that we can fill some of these posts, build, train them to leave. Although that concept seems strange, but it's a real thing. Train them to leave, but keep training them to come. Because what you find that happens is if you start to adopt a concept of training people to go somewhere else, when they go somewhere else, they start to promote where they're coming from, and people will start leaving other places to come to you. So we need to kind of adopt some slightly newer forms of thinking and strategies to deal with some of these challenges that we have.
Okay, I'm instructed that this has to be the final question/comment.
Good morning. My name is Jaime Campbell. I'm the co-founder for Kiwi, a software and app development company. I wanted to ask, what options are there for tech startups in Jamaica? For Mr. Julian Robinson.
All right. So the question is the opportunities for tech startups. There are a number of opportunities that exist. Primarily, and let me go through a couple of them. You do have many what do they call them? Accelerator programs that exist that allow you to, you know, interact with venture capitalists and so on. You also have Startup Jamaica, which is currently going through a restructuring exercise. But you also, and this is something that again goes back to what I was outlining to the chairman, you also have, as a startup organization, a challenge in that there is very little guidance that you get to determine where to go, which is why you have that question. And I think we've kind of fallen down terribly in that sense because we haven't provided enough awareness and education to direct you to where to go. So when you're talking about perhaps needing support financially to build what it is that you've come up with as a startup, you don't know where to go for that. So we talk about DBJ and JBDC and those places to go for support. We don't do a very good job of letting you know where to go. On top of that, we about 7 months ago made an attempt to create a space that business people and investors could go to find out where the startups in Jamaica are so that they could go and perhaps get products from them and so on. So we created an online space. It was called TechStart Online, that you could go there and list your startup and what your startup did, and it would allow us to point people to there to say, here are the businesses, here are their creations, here are their products. You can engage them, because there are a lot of products that people in this audience or even in the private sector find useful. They just simply don't know that we have them here. So I think we need to do a better job in, one, letting you know where to go to get assistance if you need it, but also to let everybody else know about you. Because I don't think we've as government done a tremendous job in making people aware of the creativity and the kinds of products that exist in the startup ecosystem here.
And just to add, Trevor didn't touched on it obliquely. There is a project called CMIP, Caribbean Mobile Innovation Project, funded by various sources internationally. And in the last dispensation, I was involved through UWI Consulting, whose office is just below there, and maybe you could visit it before you leave the building, to give you background information on what is possible. I have limited office from that particular agency, but I still have a lot of contact there, so you can, I trust my name is in good stead. You mentioned my name at the door downstairs, and ask them to point you to CMIP, and you get all the information on that kind of startup facility which is available.
Just to add, there's a tech conference retreat this weekend called Tech Beach Retreat in Montego Bay. Look up Kirk Hamilton and tell him what you're doing, and just tell him, say you want a free pass to come down there for the day. I mean that very seriously.
No,
I mean that
they're
pulling together a whole set of, they have a local people, international speakers. There are a couple of other, Ingrid does her quarterly meetup thing. So there are a couple of them that you kind of just have to follow in the space, and the CMIP does stuff to pitch in competitions. But, you know, you have to look online. Many of these things are done. Jaden Johnson just did a thing the other day at CPJ, 71 Lady Musgrave, where they had a meetup, in fact, 2 weeks ago. So there are a couple of them you kind of also have to get into the space and network with some of the persons in that space to find out what is going on.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Let us express our thanks to the panelists and also to the conference organizers. I wish to apologize personally to the presenters in the next session, which I had really wanted to attend because it has relevance for courses which I teach in banking and finance, but I have another meeting scheduled immediately. But thanks to the plan for live streaming, I'm sure I'll be able to watch it. Once again, thank you very much, panelists, and thank you very much, audience, for your presence. I'd like to also thank the chair. You're coming forward, Upton.
Not to detain you, just to give the usual information regarding the coffee break, which we are at now, and to ask you to thank the panel and the chair once more for what is a wonderful presentation. Thank you. So to expedite things as usual, the coffee break will be taken at either ends of the passageway. Just feel free to go to either one. And we are hoping that you can be back here at 11:15 for the start of the next session. Thank you.